Hello everyone, I'm George from Ireland. Here I am in Chiavari in Liguria, Italy, and here's a plaque showing where Mazzini stayed when he was on his way into exile in 1857 after one of his failed attempts to create a united independent republic in Italy. So Mazzini was born not far away from here in Genoa, and at that time Genoa was part of France briefly. It'd been the Napoleonic Wars. Napoleon, coming from Corsica, spoke Corsu, a dialect of Italian, as his mother tongue. Never quite perfected French grammar. Anyhow, so Italy back then had been divided into 2 dozen states. The Pope controlled the papal states in the centre of Italy, sending legates to rule over various papal states, as in these were cardinals, very, very high up priests, and they exercised political power. They weren't just spiritual leaders. So there were some various republics, like the Republic of Venice, the Republic of Genoa, where very wealthy merchant families dominated. Like Venice had the Council of Ten, the 10 leading families ruling under the Doge or the Duke. The Republic of Venice married the sea each year in a special ceremony. La Repubblica Serenissima di San Marco, the most serene Republic of Saint Mark, was the proper name of Venice. But anyway, shortly after, well, Mazzini was a child, the Napoleonic Wars ended, the Republic of Genoa became independent once again. There was a kingdom of Sardinia, Piedmont, as in the island of Sardinia, and Piedmont, which is like northwest Italy, as in foothills, was perhaps the most puissant state in northern Italy. So Mazzini grew up wanting Italy to be united and independent, and to be a republic. So obviously it's not long after the French Revolution. And he grew up in a middle-class family. He was a boy of precocious intellect, was a voracious reader. He enrolled at university at the age of 14. Now, I know people went to university younger in those days, but that really was extraordinary even for the time. Bear in mind that most people in Italy were illiterate at the time, and that was not that unusual. Like, it was the same in France and Spain. The UK and Germany were some of the few countries that probably had slightly over 50% literacy back then. So he was an intellectual. Obviously he spoke Ligurian, and standard Italian was only just emerging, quite close to Piedmontese, as in, because Piedmont was the border of France, quite close to that. So the Savoyard family, they're the ones who ruled Sardinia, Piedmont. They will eventually become kings of Italy. So here we see Mazzini. He's got pride of place on Piazza Mazzini, as in Mazzini Square. And you'll find Mazzini Square and Mazzini Street in virtually every city in Italy. So he often was swathed all in sable, in mourn for the failed revolution, for the ideals of the French Revolution having been betrayed. So northern Italy was under Austrian domination. So the Austrian Empire existed back then with a capital at Vienna. Some Italians were happy with that situation. Many of them had a very strong regional identity, might be thinking of themselves as a Sicilian, and maybe even say, I'm not an Italian. You might be Genoese and saying I'm Genoese. Being Italian doesn't really matter. What is that? So most people couldn't speak standard Italian back then. So people had a very strong attachment to their city, and they'd often be at war against each other. Some people liked to be ruled by the Pope. So we know that his campaign ultimately succeeded, but it was far from obvious at the time. And just because it succeeded, that shouldn't make us presume that it was right that it succeeded. Anyway, he was almost exactly the same age as Giuseppe Garibaldi, and they're both named Giuseppe, as in Joseph, who's born not so far away in Nice, which is now part of France, but then wasn't, or Nizza as they called it. Anyway, I won't take you through everything he did, but there were a number of attempts to launch revolutions. He's a part of I Carabinieri, as in the burners of charcoal. So some of them really did burn charcoal, but it was a clandestine revolutionary organization. He was also a Freemason, and Catholics were not allowed to join that. He was brought up a Catholic like virtually everybody else. He was highly critical of the Catholic Church. He also excoriated Protestantism for being too vociferous, because so there's a lot of anti-clericalism and European radicalism at the time, feeling that the Catholic Church was obscurantist, tried to keep people in ignorance, was so often preaching sermons in favor of the reaction, of censorship, of absolute monarchy, and so on, of inequality, speaking up for oligarchy, if not outright dictatorship. Anyway, so Mazzini, he made a number of failed attempts to overthrow governments here. A number of his colleagues were executed. He had to flee over the Alps on a few occasions, spent some time in Switzerland, had at least 3 sojourns in London, quite a long ones, and was an icon of radicalism for many British people as well. And Garibaldi spent some of that time there as well. Indeed, when the Liberal Party was founded in the United Kingdom, the only thing they could agree on was Italian independence. And like William Ewart Gladstone, the famous Liberal Prime Minister, he had castigated the Sicilian government, saying it was the negation of God. And he'd been quite helpful to the cause of Italian independence, stationing the Royal Navy at strategic points, but never actually intervening, threatening King Bomba as the king of the 2 Sicilies, that's to say Sicily and the mainland area around Naples, that he might bombard them. Didn't do so at all. That king is known as King Bomba for having bombarded cities of his own in his own kingdom to punish them for being rebellious. So Mazzini wanted the right to vote for every man. He also believed in women's rights. He was really ahead of his time. So he was part of the 1,000 heroes, the red shirts like Garibaldi. But he didn't go to America like Garibaldi did. Garibaldi's red shirts came from Uruguay. Supposedly these shirts were made for slaughterhouses in Buenos Aires, just across the River Plate, as in so you wouldn't stain yourself with bovine blood after you'd slaughtered a cow or something. But then they said, no, we'll just use these red shirts, my army. It catches the eye, very striking, and also won't show our blood if we're wounded, as in so not to demoralize our comrades. Anyway, so there were different strands within Italian nationalism. And where is Italy anyway? Is it only northern Italy? That's what some people cared about. Does it include Corsica? That's part of Italy, arguably. How about Ticino, the Italian-speaking region in Switzerland? They still don't have San Marino or indeed the Vatican. San Marino is not part of the Italian Republic because one time when Garibaldi was on the run, he asked the people of the San Marinese to shelter him, and they agreed to take him in, and he promised that in return they would never be forced to join Italy, and indeed they're not. So there were many little states, a bit like San Marino back in the old days. So there was a more conservative sort of nationalism under Charles Albert, as in the King of Sardinia, Piedmont, and believed there should be a monarchy and the right to vote should be more limited, and there ought to be a state which had Catholicism as its state religion. He also wrote to the Pope, who didn't even bother to reply to him. Remember, the popes from, say, 1520 to 1978 were Catholic. Sorry, popes were Catholic. Popes were Italian without exception. Because, of course, when a pope dies, there's a papal conclave, as in conclave, with the key when they're locked in, and they get no communications, no newspapers or anything, only food and laundry. When they elect the cardinals, roughly 100 cardinals, elect the new pope, usually from amongst themselves. And because almost every medium-sized town has got an archbishop in Italy, and most archbishops get to be cardinals, that's so many cardinals, so they picked one of their own. Even the current one, Pope Francis, or Juan Bergoglio, was born in Argentina to Italian parents, so he can be regarded as Italian too. So anyway, Mazzini was not willing to compromise with monarchy, and there was the famous occasion at Teano where Garibaldi, he met Victor Emmanuel, who was the next king of Sardinia, Piedmont, and recognized him as he would be the rightful king of Italy, even though Garibaldi was a Republican by conviction. And when it came to some orders from him saying, "Obbedisco." So Mazzini had been in Rome in 1848. That November 1848, they'd driven out the Pope, declared the Roman Republic. So almost everyone there was a Catholic, but nevertheless they were not going to submit to the temporal power of the Pope. So he's a religious leader. He shouldn't be a political ruler. That degrades and sullies his spiritual purity, and it distracts the church from its religious activities. Plus, they're so reactionary. They practice censorship, and they don't give people the right to vote. So they're just so often ultra-conservative. They're against what's good for the majority of people. Anyway, they were defeated after a while. The French army came. The truce was negotiated in 1849. Garibaldi, Mazzini, and their followers, they retreated into the Apennine Mountains, hoping to fight on. That's when Garibaldi had famously said, "Ovunque saremo." I can't remember how they put it. "Ovunque siamo, saremo Roma." So wherever we shall be, will be Rome. Wherever we are shall be Rome. So we don't actually need to be in the city. If we're just controlling a mountain, us Italian nationalists, that effectively is Rome. We keep the cause of Italian independence going. It's fine in 1861. It